Now, today, I already mentioned today, I'm not speaking. I have the privilege of introducing my friend Rachel, and many of you already know Rachel. In fact, Rachel preached on Mother's Day. Was it Mother's Day? Yeah, Rachel preached on Mother's Day. It was the very first time she ever preached in her life, and it's always a little bit nerve-wracking, to be honest. It's nerve-wracking as a pastor when you let somebody preach for the very first time, because you just never quite know what's going to happen. They might be great with words and then just lock up, and it's just always a little bit scary. And I believed that Rachel was going to do a great job on Mother's Day, but she killed it on Mother's Day. And so right after Mother's Day, I was like, hey, you want to do this again? And so she's here. So if you don't know Rachel and her husband Kyle are at this point some of the longest standing team members at City North, and she's going to tell you a bit more about that, I think, today. But she and her husband Kyle help lead our City North kids team and also our City North students teams. They're some of just the best people that I know. They have stood by us through some really, really hard times, and I'll let you tell the rest of that. But would you guys do me a huge favor and give the best you have for Rachel?
Well, good morning. Thank you, Pastor Andrew, for that. I am excited to be back in here with you guys again. I am a little bit intimidated because last week there were 5 people on the stage, and I feel like I have to live up to that. So if you guys couldn't be here last week or you haven't had a chance to catch up on YouTube, we did something a little bit different. We had 5 people stand on stage and talk for 5 minutes about one similar theme. And the question was, what would you say to the church? And let me tell you, they went there. They were honest and they were vulnerable and they were really brave. So shout out to all 5 of them. They did a really good job, and I know that God spoke through them. And so if you haven't had a chance to catch up yet, go to our YouTube channel. That needs to be the top of your priority list the next time you have a spare half an hour, 45 minutes, because they did a really great job. And I will try to live up to that today by being as honest and real as possible. So the question I have for you guys today is, have you ever had to ruin something for someone? And I don't mean you ruined something for someone because you thought it would be funny, though that does often happen. And I'm not talking about when you kind of spoil something for someone just to see what they're going to do, kind of like my cousin Grant, who stole my brand new copy of the last Harry Potter book and read the epilogue out loud to me before I got a chance to read any of the rest of the book. Pure rage. I'm not talking about that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, has there ever been a time in your life where you felt like the kindest thing to do for someone was to ruin something for them before they got too attached and then got their heart broken? That has happened to me, and that happened to me with my husband Kyle and our venture of watching wrestling together. So my embarrassing confession is that every week my husband Kyle and I watch wrestling together. And it started over 10 years ago when we started dating. Kyle was interested in wrestling, and I had never met anyone who watched wrestling regularly, so I was fascinated. I grew up in a house of all girls and a sports dad, so that was not on our TV. So I asked him a lot of questions about wrestling. I just was really interested, partially because I had never met someone like that, and partially because I thought he was cute, and when you think someone's cute, you pretend to be interested in what they're interested in. But the more that I talked to him about it, the more I realized what he loves about wrestling is he loves the storytelling. And if you know anything about my husband, you know that he loves a good story more than anything else in the world. My entire house full of movie memorabilia will speak to that. He loves a good story. And that's what wrestling is. It has characters, it has conflict, it has resolution. And it's happening in live time. People are doing live stunts, they're acting out a story in real time, and you never know what's going to happen. And once I understood that, wrestling kind of became this fun adventure thing for us to do weekly. Just instead of date nights, we watch wrestling, and usually there's pizza involved. So, you can't really go wrong with that. And I remember a very specific wrestling show a couple years ago where it was a tag team tournament. Tag teams, there are 2 guys on a team. You don't need to know the details of wrestling. It's fine. But there's a tag team tournament, and they were doing a lot of video packages to explain who these people were. And there was one tag team I loved so much. And it was because they kept talking about how good of friends these guys are. One guy was the best man in the other one's wedding, and they were always there for each other. And I fell hook, line, and sinker for the very adorable friendship that was happening on my TV screen. And Kyle, in his infinite patience and love for me kept warning me, don't get too attached. This is wrestling. They are professional liars. Like, nothing lasts forever. Do not get too attached. Of course, I got too attached. And of course, 2 weeks later, one of them turns on the other one and betrays him and hits him in the back of the head. And I am devastated. And I learned that day to be invested, but not too invested. So I tell you that story today because I'm a little bit afraid that that's what I'm going to do to all of you today. We are going to be talking about a very famous verse in the Bible that's kind of taken over the church. And it's very important to a lot of people, and it's actually very important to me, but I'm afraid that when we talk about it, I might ruin it for you a little bit. And so I want to start out by saying that is not my goal. My goal is not to ruin this verse for you. My goal is, I am afraid we have made this verse too small. I am afraid we have made this verse mean much less than what it actually means. And so I'm hopeful that as we go on this journey today to look at this verse, it will not be ruined, but we will have a deeper understanding. It will have a deeper meaning for our lives, and we can move forward with a deeper understanding of who God is. So the verse I'm talking about is Jeremiah 29:11. If you have never heard that verse, that is okay. We are going to talk all about it today. But if you have been in the church for the past 15 years, and especially if you're a woman, I feel like it's marketed to women a lot, you have probably seen this verse. It has been put on picture frames, on mugs, on t-shirts. I know some of us in the room have this verse tattooed on our bodies, which is awesome. And it is a really awesome verse. And if you haven't heard it, this is what it says. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Now, some of you may know the Bible was not actually written in English. This particular part of the Bible was written in ancient Hebrew thousands of years ago. So it's safe to say that sometimes it's hard to translate those writings into language for today. So here is another way that people have translated Jeremiah 29:11, another way you could say this verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and hope. So that all sounds pretty good, right? I think we can all find comfort in thinking that God's plans towards us are true and good and lovely, and he has a hope and a future for us. And I do believe that is true of God. I do believe God's heart towards us is good. But if we just take that verse as it is, when we come up against real pain, when we come up against real heartache, when we come up against the last year that we have all had, over a year now, of over 4 million people dying of one single disease, of our country seeming like it's trying to tear itself apart faster than ever, of social media being as toxic as it has ever been, of a lot of us feeling like our friends and family are no longer safe spaces, when we come up against that, you can't just say, well, Jeremiah 29:11 says God's plans for us are good, so it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. That feels hollow. And that's what happens when we leave out an important part of the Bible, and that's this thing called context. So some of you know, the Bible is actually one giant long story. I know there's a lot of books in there, and it feels like none of them fit together. But the first book is Genesis, the last book is Revelation, and altogether that is one giant story. And so what happens is sometimes we take a verse out of that story and we repeat it over and over and over again, and we forget, what story did that even come from? What is happening in the book of the Bible of Jeremiah when Jeremiah 29:11 is said? What's happening? And when we leave out that context, sometimes we forget what is actually being said in that verse. And we can make it mean something a little bit different than what was originally supposed to mean when we don't know what the story was. So let's look at the context of Jeremiah 29:11. The book of Jeremiah is in the Old Testament, so that's the first half of the Bible. The Old Testament is basically God creating all the things, everything you see, including humans. And then he picks out a specific group of humans called the Israelites to be his people. And his goal is for the Israelites to shine his light to the rest of the world, and everyone will see that and want to follow him. I got to say, the Israelites don't do a great job at that most of the time. So most of the Old Testament is them forgetting God, coming back to God, forgetting God, coming back to God. And then in the New Testament, Jesus shows up on the scene, and he is an Israelite. He's a part of that people, and he comes from God to show people this is how God created us to live. This is how you can live in this world the way God created. And then he went to the cross, and he died, and then he was resurrected in order to show God gives us new life. So that's kind of Old Testament and New Testament. Jeremiah is in the Old Testament. And Jeremiah was a prophet to God's people of Israel. And he had picked out these people to kind of shine his light. And when they didn't do that very well, or when there was a lot of stress or upheaval, maybe God's people were doing something stupid like worshiping gods made of stone. God does not appreciate that. Maybe they were doing something like exploiting the poor among them. Instead of taking care of them, they were taking advantage of them. Sometimes God's people did truly evil things like sacrificing babies in religious rites. God was not a fan of that. And so he would send prophets to tell people his message, basically to say, you have turned your backs on me, please turn back towards me, and all the bad things that are happening in your nation will go away, but there are going to be consequences if you don't turn back to God. So prophets were not very popular people because no one really likes being called out on their stuff. But here are just these random dudes like walking around saying the reason our nation is a mess is because y'all can't get your act together and worship the one true God. So that's who Jeremiah is. He is a prophet, so he is a very unpopular man, and he is living during one of the darkest times in Israel's history. Like I said, Israel kept messing up. They kept going the wrong direction. And when that would happen, God would let other nations conquer them. And he was basically like, y'all can't take care of your nation, so someone's going to come in. And that happened over and over and over again. And probably the most painful and devastating of those conquerings was the conquering by Babylon. So Babylonian Empire, ancient world power, this giant world power comes in and basically conquers the nation. And nothing good basically happens after that. And when Babylon conquered a nation, they didn't just like come into a city or a country and be like, yay, we won, and like that was it. They wanted their victory to be complete. So they would actually exile people. They would take people, so in this instance from Israel, they would take people from Israel and they would take them all the way back to Babylon. And then they would replace them with people from Babylon, and they would take the best of Israel. They would take their artisans, they would take their philosophers and thinkers, they would take their religious leaders, they would take the best of a country and replace them with their own people. And the reason they did that was so the people that were conquered would forget where they came from. They would forget their culture, they would forget their language, and most importantly, they would forget their God. And that way, everyone would just look the same. Everyone would believe the same thing that Babylon believed. And then the Babylonian Empire was bigger because there weren't little countries in it anymore. Everyone was one and the same. So this is the time period that Jeremiah is living in. And if this sounds familiar to you, it's because Andrew actually talked about this approximately 1 month ago. So in his message called How to Bring Dry Bones to Life, that is about the book of Ezekiel, which is also happening during the Babylonian Empire. So if you want to learn more about Babylon and exile, or you just want to hear a crazy story about a valley full of dead bodies, go check out his message on YouTube. But that's the time period that Jeremiah is living in. And Jeremiah was called to be a prophet during this time, but especially before Babylon invaded. And he spent his entire adult life telling people, if we do not get our acts together, this is all going to go away. And that is definitely not what anyone wanted to hear. And they didn't change their ways, and they were conquered. And Jeremiah was actually present in Jerusalem, which is the capital city of Israel, when the Babylonian Empire did what's called the siege of Jerusalem. And if you don't know what a siege is, because you're not interested in ancient warfare, I understand. I'll explain. A siege is, in the ancient times, it's a warfare tactic. In ancient times, you would build a city. How do you protect a city full of people when there's just like anyone who can attack you from every corner? You build a giant wall. And so attacking armies were like, oh, we can't go through the wall. We can't necessarily just tunnel under the wall. We can't go over. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, you kind of have the idea of a siege. So conquering armies came up with a new strategy. Their strategy was, we will surround the city wall and we will cut off the food and water supply. And we will let everyone inside the city slowly starve to death. And then it will be very easy to take the city because there will not be many people left. Because they didn't care about the people, they wanted the stuff. And the Babylonian Empire did that to Jerusalem. And if you want to read some of the most gut-wrenching stories of the Bible, they're in the book of Jeremiah during the siege. And you can read a lot of painful conversations, including conversations about what non-food items are we going to eat to live a little bit longer. That is in the Bible, and that is in the book of Jeremiah where this verse comes from. So by the time we get to Jeremiah chapter 29, Jeremiah has seen some stuff. He has seen his country be ripped apart. He has seen tons of people be exiled to Babylon. Some of them probably died along the way. They are not sure if they're ever coming home. And he's back in Jerusalem, and everyone's just looking for hope. And the vision God gives him is that very soon Jerusalem is going to be conquered completely. Very soon, the temple of God, which was the place they actually believed God dwelt among them, was going to be leveled to the ground. And the people did not want to hear that. I don't blame them for not wanting to hear that. Half of their nation's already been exported. Families they will never see again. And they're being told it's only going to get worse. And they're expecting God to rescue them because he has done it before. He has rescued them before. They've turned their backs on him. Other people have conquered them, and God has come in and rescued them before, and they're just waiting for that to happen. And there are even other prophets in the land of Babylon. So Jeremiah is back in Jerusalem. He can't talk to the exiles directly. There are other prophets in the land of Babylon who are saying, yeah, God gave us a vision. It's going to be fine. So in Jeremiah 28, another prophet, Hananiah, says this. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says. I will remove the yoke of the king of Babylon from your necks. Within 2 years, I will bring back all the temple treasures that King Nebuchadnezzar carried off to Babylon. I will bring back Jehoiachin, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and all the other captives that were taken from Babylon. So that's what people wanted to hear. They had already been taken from their homes. They had already been ripped away. They're already in a foreign country that basically doesn't let them do any of the things that they want to do. And Hananiah comes along and says, 2 years. You have to do this for 2 years, and then God will come and get you. And Jeremiah is like, yes, I hope that is what happens. I hope that's the prophecy that comes true. But that was not the vision that God had given him. That was not the picture God had given him, and he couldn't lie about that. And so he tried to warn people that this isn't going to be over in 2 years. I wish it was, but it's not going to be over in 2 years. God has a plan that he is enacting, and he's going to see it through to the end. And so that brings us to Jeremiah 29. Jeremiah has watched his homeland be ripped apart. He is currently fighting with the other prophets of God, and they are disagreeing about what God is trying to say to the people. And all Jeremiah is trying to do is be faithful. That's all he's trying to do is be faithful. So he decides he's going to write a letter to the exiles in Babylon, and he's going to tell them everything God has told him to say. And this is what he says. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says to the captives he has exiled to Babylon from Jerusalem. Build homes and plan to stay. Plant gardens and eat the food that they produce. Marry and have children. Then find spouses for them so that you may have many grandchildren. Multiply, do not dwindle away. And work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, for its welfare will determine your welfare. I can tell you, if I am an exile in Babylon, this is not the letter I want to receive. I don't want to build a home here. I do not want to plant a garden here. I do not want to build a life here. And I especially do not want to pray for the peace and prosperity of the people who exiled me here. That's not what I want to do. And unfortunately, Jeremiah's letter does not get any more encouraging to them. Next, Jeremiah says, this is what the Lord says. You will be in Babylon for 70 years. 70 years. An entire generation of Israelites is going to be born, live a life, and die in Babylon before they get to come home. That is devastating news. And that is what immediately precedes this famous Jeremiah 29:11 verse, all of this bad news. But immediately following that, this is what God says. But then I will come, and I will do for you all the good things I have promised, and I will bring you home again. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a hope and a future. You see, God's picture of good plans does not look like the same as our picture of good plans. In fact, God's plans for good can feel like plans for disaster. Our picture of good plans does not involve trying to thrive in the pain. Our picture of good plans means leaving the pain. Our picture of good plans means being rescued out of it. Our picture of good plans does not involve waiting 70 years for rescue, of maybe never even seeing a resolution to this pain in our lifetime. That's not our picture of good plans. But what we see is that God's good plans can feel like disaster, but that's because he sees so much more than what we see. He sees so much more of this world and of time than what we see. He knows what's going to be actually good for us and not just what feels good to us. He knows all the pieces he's fitting together, pieces we don't even see, and pieces for all of humanity. He has a plan for this world and all of humanity, not just for us. And one thing I want to point out about Jeremiah 29:11, when it says, I know the plans I have for you, that you word there, he is not talking to a specific person. He is talking to the group. He is talking to the nation of Israel. I know the plans I have for my people. So I'm sorry to say, Jeremiah 29:11 is not a personal promise for you. It's not a personal promise for me. It is not a personal promise for any individual. It is not a personal promise that God's plans for us are always going to be sunny. It is not a personal promise that we are always going to know crystal clear what we are supposed to be doing. There are times God is going to open a door and he's going to ask us to walk through it, and it'll feel really clear. There are other times he's going to present us with two options of equal value and ask us to choose. And there are times he's going to ask us to follow him when we do not see any direction whatsoever. So Jeremiah 29:11 is not an individual promise, but it does speak to the heart of God, that God's heart towards his people is good. So we can still find comfort in that, even though this verse isn't about us specifically mining out a very specific step-by-step playbook to follow God's will. I am not sure how God's will and our independence, I don't know how that works together all the time, but I know God's heart towards us is good. And the other thing I want to point out about Jeremiah 29:11 is that somewhere along the way of repeating this verse over and over and saying it everywhere, we have added a timetable to it. We have basically in our minds, when we sit here, I have the good plan, I know the good plans I have for you, plans for good, and plans to give you hope in a future. We think soon. We think this pain's going to end soon. We're standing at this side of the arch, and we think we should be able to see the other side of the arch. We think we should be able to see the other side of the story, that this will happen soon. We want rescue in 2 years instead of 70. And that's not what this story is about. This story is not about rescue in 2 years after 70. This story is actually about flourishing in the middle of pain. Because we don't want to build houses, and we don't want to plant gardens, and we don't want to build a life in pain. We want the pain to go away. But that's not what we see here. We see God empowering his people to flourish even in the middle of dire circumstances. Because God does rescue Israel after 70 years, and they get to come home. And by some miracle, they did not forget their culture, and they did not forget their language, and they did not forget their God. So when they come home, they get to rebuild the temple, and they get to rebuild their culture. And that is the culture that Jesus is born into. Jesus is born into a culture that has known incredible heartache and has been conquered over and over and over again. And Jesus chose to make his home there. One of the names for Jesus is God in the flesh, which I admit is a very creepy name, so we're not going to dwell too much on that. But all that means is God and Jesus were one. Jesus did not have to take on a human body that is susceptible to breaking down and disease. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to enter the world and deal with all the temptations we get thrown at us every single day. He didn't have to do that. He definitely did not have to submit to dying, and he definitely didn't have to submit and experience death and being dead for 3 days before he was resurrected. But he chose to do that. He chose to come here and live a life among the pain, because the reality is God doesn't usually take the pain away, but he is present with us in the pain. And that is no more evident than Jesus choosing to live a life among all of us. And he went into a culture that had not only known incredible heartache, but a culture that had turned its back on God over and over and over again. And Jesus still chose to make his home there. You see, the real secret of Jeremiah 29:11 is not that good plans are coming our way. It's the fact that we have a good planner who loves us. So trust the planner, not the plans. You see, what God was actually saying in this letter to the exiles wasn't, guys, it's going to be fine. Like, I'm going to do something really cool and you will not believe and you'll tell a really great story, so it's going to be fine. That's not what he's saying in Jeremiah 29:11. What he's saying is, this is really bad, but trust me. Trust me when I tell you that you can flourish even in disaster times. Trust me that my heart towards you is good. Trust me that even if you don't see a resolution to this pain in your lifetime, that my plans are still good. You know, we as humans can make some really lovely plans. We can work really hard on our plans. Some of us are brilliant planners, some of us aren't, but we really care about our plans. And we derive a lot of comfort from them. We derive a lot of identity from them. When life gets hard, you know what keeps us motivated to keep going? Well, we have a plan. I know what the next step is. We have a plan. And sometimes maybe those are plans that God has given you. Maybe God gave you a picture of a really awesome way that you're going to make this world better. Maybe God gave that picture to you and you feel like you and God have been talking about it and you feel like you and God have been making plans and you're really excited about it. But then what happens when those plans don't go the way that we thought they were going to go? Did that mean you didn't hear from God? Did that mean you saw God's picture wrong? Did that mean that you did something wrong? You didn't do your part? Did that mean your plan was wrong? Not necessarily. Maybe God is just showing you a picture, but someone else is actually going to make that thing happen. Maybe God is showing you a picture so you keep going, but maybe that's not going to come to a resolution in your lifetime. And maybe God is just reminding you that you don't need to trust in the plans. You need to trust the planner. Some of you know that my husband Kyle and I were on the launch team at City North, so we've been here from almost day one. Not quite the Andrew telling Vanessa that he wanted to plant a church and her saying no part of day one, but shortly after that part of it, we have been here from the beginning. But I don't know that we've ever shared our full City North story. We met about 15 years ago in college in Southern Ohio, and we became friends. And the year we became friends was the year before Kyle was going to go on a 7-month-long internship in Westerville, which was his hometown. So as we kind of started to think, well, he's kind of cute, she's kind of cute, we get along really well. So we started to like each other. We were like, this is dumb. We should not start dating when the first 7 months of our relationship are guaranteed to be long distance. And like all great college students, we did it anyway. And in our instance, it worked out. We dated for 2.5 years. We got married. And then about a year into marriage, Kyle got the offer to be the youth pastor at the church that he interned at. And I had always loved Westerville when we had visited. And I said, if we get a chance to move to Westerville, I think we should. And so he accepted this position as a youth pastor in Westerville and started his ministry career. And about 3 years into that, I actually came on staff as well. Their longtime office administrator had retired, and they asked me if I'd be interested in taking over. And I said yes, and I truly thought that it was going to be forever. We had a staff that had been friends for a really long time who I really loved. We had an extended church family, spiritual family, who was very encouraging to us, very supportive of us. We had the best youth group kids. We had taken the youth group from about 20 middle schoolers on Thursday nights to about 60 high schoolers and middle schoolers by the time, this time 3 to 4 years later. On our last retreat we went on, we took 80 middle school and high schoolers, which was terrifying, but encouraging at the same time. And I absolutely thought that was going to be forever. But I didn't know that Kyle was actually having a really hard time. Kyle had realized over the past 3 or 4 years that there were a lot of vision differences between him and some of the other staff members. And at first he just thought, well, we're just different. We'll work together. We'll figure it out. But over time, he realized these are pretty big vision differences. And he felt like he kept having to explain why he was doing something he was doing, or he felt like he kept just not doing things the way that he would want to reach kids. And eventually it started taking a toll on his mental health, that he felt like he couldn't be all in. He felt like he couldn't say and do the things that he believed, and he felt like God was convicting him to do. And then he found out that the staff member that he was closest to, who he considers a mentor, was thinking about leaving too. And he couldn't tell me for several months because that wasn't his story to tell. And that made him feel guilty about the entire situation. That made him feel worse. And eventually this staff member put in his resignation, and it was not a great staff meeting, let's put it that way. And I remember coming home, and Kyle just looked at me and said, here's the deal. If you feel like God tells you we should stay, we will stay. But I don't know how much longer I can do this. I don't know. I don't think I can do this. And so we left. And that was a really painful decision to make. That was a really hard decision to put language around. We didn't have a good way of explaining to our teens. There was no big incident that happened. We just can't do this anymore, no matter how much we love you. A lot of the teens that we had started with were juniors or seniors in high school, so they were about to launch into the next chapter of their lives, and they felt like we abandoned them at a really important time. It was really hard to explain to our extended church family because we weren't leaving that city. So we were still going to see people. We just weren't going to be at that church anymore. And that's not usual for staff members leaving. And I just remember the first church service we went to after our last day there. That was the first time I heard the song Resurrecting by Elevation Worship, which we have done at City North a couple times. And if you are familiar, the bridge says, by your spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrecting King is resurrecting me. And I have, of course, just standing in the auditorium bawling, and Kyle's just holding my hand, and he has nothing to say because he feels like this is his fault. He feels like it's his fault that we left. It's his fault I'm sad. It's his fault all these kids are abandoned. And it wasn't, but that's how he felt. And then this mentor who had been on staff with knew Andrew and Vanessa. And so once we kind of moved a little bit past the initial shock of leaving, he was like, hey, I know this couple. They're coming to Westerville to plant a church, and I think we should all meet with them. And so we got together at this mentor's house, and that was the first time we met Andrew and Vanessa. And strangely, Andrew and Vanessa knew some people from our college that even the other people didn't know. So that was a funny connection. And we heard Andrew tell the story of the picture God had put on his heart about a church that was different and a church for people who didn't like church. And it wasn't just us at this meeting. There were other families who had been at the previous church with us who felt like it was time for them to move on as well. And so there was this whole group, probably 10 or 15 of us, that were listening to Andrew talk about this beautiful picture that God had given him. And it felt like a family reunion for us. Like, these were people we loved, who we thought we weren't going to get to do church with anymore. And here's this open door with Andrew, that there's a beautiful picture for a church. And it just felt like the automatic right next step. And there was a whole plan. There was like a launch book that was like this thick. Like, he had it professionally printed. It felt like there was a plan. That was the next step. And it felt like the door that we should walk through. And it felt like coming home. Except we didn't know what we were doing in any way, shape, or form. We had a playbook and we didn't know how to implement it. Our launch team did not grow the way that we had hoped that it would grow. And that meant a lot of us had to do a lot of extra work and wear a lot of hats that we didn't think we were going to have to make. We were portable, meeting in schools, and so we had to set up and tear down everything every week. And some of you were there for that, and you remember that. At the very beginning, it was 7-hour days. We started at 7 and we left at 3. And we did that for almost a year. And we were portable for 2 years. And a lot of us on the team, maybe without realizing it, had a lot of church hurt. And we hadn't spent a lot of time healing because we kind of jumped immediately into this church planting thing. And so a lot of us on the team didn't trust each other. We didn't have hard conversations when we should have because we felt like we can't handle another emotional conversation, or conversations were much more emotional than they needed to be. After a 7-hour setup and tear down day, that did not go well. There was a lot of us who just didn't trust each other, and so there were a lot of backdoor conversations. And slowly, Kyle and I watched as every single person that we knew before City North who had joined this journey with us decided it was time for their City North journey to be done and for them to move on. And then the church moved from Westerville to Sunbury. Don't get me wrong, I'm very glad we are here now. I'm very glad to see all of you. But at the time, that was a difficult move, and we lost more team members because they couldn't make the drive further from Westerville to Sunbury. And then in the week of Christmas, 2018, some of you were here for that time, Kyle's mentor and his wife called us and said they felt like their time at City North was done as well, and they would be moving on, and this Christmas Eve service would be their last service. And so I show up at Christmas Eve service. The only people who know this are me and Kyle and Andrew and Vanessa. I remember being in the kitchen at Big Walnut High School trying to make a hot chocolate and some big coffee carafes. It was not going well. I absolutely burned myself on hot chocolate. The only way I could describe what I was feeling was I felt brittle. Like I was trying to not cry, and Vanessa checked on me because she knew what was going on, and I was like, we can't talk about this, because if we talk about this, I'm going to cry uncontrollably, and everyone's Christmas Eve service will be ruined. Like that's where we're at this point. And I remember going back and hiding in the nursery, and I cuddled a baby Gavin who was in a very cute Santa onesie, and I just remember thinking, what are we doing here? At that point, Kyle was basically done. He told me that we could stay if I wanted to stay, but he had no more left to give. He had no more emotion to give. He had no more effort to give. And I was on the directional team, and I loved that, but I really didn't want to talk about it at home because I felt like I was holding him hostage. And I felt like I was setting us up for another situation like our last church where his mental health was going to suffer because I wanted to stay. And I wasn't even sure why I was staying. Like I couldn't give you one specific answer The only thing I held on to was that we had invited our friends Jake and Alex, and they had invited friends and family, and a lot of their friends and family had found City North home. And I felt the responsibility to just stay and honor that, but it was really painful, and I didn't know what we were doing. And so Kyle's strategy, because he always has a strategy, was to hide out in City North Kids, because at least with kids, he could just be a clown for a little while, and his mom was back there, so that felt safe. And so he basically just hid out in City North Kids for several years, for a year, and we just didn't talk about church much at home. And I do remember some people basically being like, "Why are you staying?" And I was like, I don't know. Like, I didn't say I don't know, but in my heart I was saying I don't know. And I definitely, whenever anyone asked me, how's this church planting thing going, the answer was, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I don't know if that's actually true, but that's what I felt like at that moment. But through it all, God was still using us, even when we had literally nothing left to give. The directional team started to get healthy. Andrew got healthier and grew in his leadership. I got healthier and learned to not shoot down people's ideas immediately. At least I try not to do that anymore. Vanessa started to find her own health and freedom, and we were able to bring some new people onto the directional team to just help us carry the burden of leading this thing. Some really special people stepped up in City North Kids, and I have to give Courtney Coolidge the biggest shout out ever, because she is running things back there today, because so I could be in here and do this with you, and she is a godsend to me in every definition of the word. And then there came one really special night. There was a family in our church who was going through a really hard time. It was a really painful time. And their youngest boy, who is 6 or 7 at the time, just spent the whole night crying, and he wouldn't go to sleep. And he just is crying, and his mom is crying, and we're just in a crying cycle at this point. And she asked him, "Is there anyone you want to talk to about this?" And he said, "Mr. Kyle." So she texted me and said, "Hey, my son's having a really hard time tonight. Can we schedule a call with Kyle tomorrow?" And I was like, if your son's having a hard time tonight, we're going to do a call tonight. Like, that's not a schedule conversation. That's a crisis, call me when you need to call me. So Kyle and this little boy got on the phone, and they had a really hard conversation about when life is really scary, and about when life is really overwhelming, and about when you wish you could fix something and you can't, and about how when stuff feels like it's your fault and it's probably not your fault, but that doesn't really make you feel any better, and about how God is always your best friend and you can always talk to God, and how hopefully God has sent you some really awesome grown-ups to help talk to you about it. And they ended the conversation, and this boy went to sleep. Thank God, that was the goal. And I didn't know this at the time, but that was a pivotal moment for Kyle, because he got off the phone, and his overwhelming feeling was, I do not deserve the trust that that boy just placed in me, because I have been phoning it in for a year. I have been giving nothing, and God still worked through me, and I don't deserve that. And slowly, Kyle started to find some healing from his church hurt that had happened. And eventually, instead of saying things like, City North believes this, or that's important to City North, he started saying, we believe this. That's important to us, without even realizing it. He has no idea the day that changed, but it definitely started happening. And then probably 6 months ago, we had a small group leader training after service. And I am normally the one talking around, and Kyle's dragging me out to the car. And I'm shutting off lights. Why is everyone, why are we not going home? And I walk in, and Kyle and Andrew are sitting here on this stage. And I will be forever grateful I got to witness this conversation. And they were having a really hard conversation about how hard the last 4.5 years had been, and how Kyle hadn't been present for a lot of it, and how we definitely were not sure we were going to make it here, and how there were a lot of times that we weren't sure that we liked each other. That was very real. But praise God that we are here, and that we can definitively say that we like each other, and that even when we were all doing our best and our best wasn't enough, God was still working. And we were here till 3:00, everybody. We were here till 3:00 talking about this. But it's one of my favorite things that's ever happened. And then just a few months after that was July 4th. And the Kahn family was kind enough to invite many City North families to their house for July 4th. And if you know Kyle, he is loud, but he is introverted, so he gets tired of people quickly. He's not a big fan of parties. He's definitely not a big fan of outdoor parties. Like, all of this is not his favorite. But his extroverted wife loves parties, loves holidays, loves celebrating things. And so we were standing in the kitchen, and I was like, we are going to the July 4th party, and we are staying till fireworks. And he was like, okay. And I was like, I'm telling you this so you can mentally prepare for the day that will be for you. And we went to the Kahns, and we just had the best time. People brought a lot of good food. We got to sit around. I got to know a lot of new City North families better. My favorite, closest people, some of my favorite, most closest people to me in the world were there, and that was special. We got to watch the kids play together. We got to watch lots of grown-ups try to murder each other on 4x4. Like, I don't know if they were trying to murder. It was a little bit iffy. My husband got inducted into the official City North Scooter Squad Hall of Fame, so got his t-shirt. Yes, City North Scooter Squad. If you don't know what it is, just come ask me. It's a whole thing. There's video evidence. So that was a really special day for me. And then Twilight started, and it had that summer golden light. And we played a wiffle ball game. And that sounds really pedestrian, but guys, I don't have a history of athletic prowess, of all of the accomplishments in my life. Athletics is not one of them. But they wanted to play a wiffle ball game, and 4-year-old Jackson King wanted me to play. So I played. And that in of itself is evidence of what City North has done in my life, because before City North, I wouldn't have played. Because why do something you're not going to be good at? And why do something that you wore the wrong shoes for and you might fall down anyway? But as we were playing this wiffle ball game, it's one of the most pure moments of joy in my life. And then we went and we saw fireworks in the dark, and there were sparklers, and there were glow sticks, and we ate a ridiculous amount of candy. And I'm driving home, and Kyle falls asleep immediately because introvert. And I'm just driving home, and I'm crying the entire way, because that is one of the best days that has ever happened in my entire life. And that is everything I have ever wanted from a spiritual family. And I got home, and I texted some of my closest people just thanking God for that. And I texted Amanda and said thank you, though I know she did not get why it was important to me. She just thought she was throwing a July 4th party. But I realized on July 4th that I got that day because we stayed. And we stayed when this thing felt like disaster. We stayed, and we planted gardens, and we built homes, and we just kept giving when we had nothing else to give. And next week, City North is going to celebrate its 5th birthday. And that's not just because Kyle and I stayed, that's because many of us stayed and continued to plant gardens and build houses, even when this thing looked nothing like what we wanted it to look like, and it felt like absolute disaster. Guys, we had a good plan. We had a whole playbook, and we thought that we were running the plays the way we were supposed to run the plays. We were doing our best. But at the end of the day, City North still exists and is going to be 5 next week because we trusted the planner and not the plan. So if you're in a place that feels like disaster right now, it is okay to admit that. We do not have to pretend that that's not what that feels like. You're allowed to say, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. But what you do need to do is you need to start planting gardens. And you do need to start building houses. And you do need to plan to stay and to be in it for the long haul. because God has made it so that we can flourish even when times are hard, even in times of disaster. In fact, a lot of times we flourish best in times of disaster. And what the story of Jeremiah is all about is that we can stay, we can flourish, even when the hard stuff doesn't go away, because we have a planner whose thoughts towards us are good. All right, let's pray. God, I do not know all of the secret pieces that you put together to land us all in this room. I don't know the secret pieces you put together that made it to where City North could still exist. I know my pieces. I know some of the other pieces, but there are pieces that you fit together that we will never know this side of heaven. And I am just in awe of that, God. And I am in awe of for every single person who is here, of the pieces you have fit together in their lives that they could be sitting in these seats today, or they could be listening to this message later online, that you put pieces in their lives together for a plan that is beyond what we could ever imagine, and for a story that is better than any wrestling show could ever be. And God, there are some of us, we have not trusted your plan, and we have not trusted your heart towards us because it has felt like disaster. And we acknowledge that, God, and we don't pretend that otherwise. But God, we also know that your plans are what led us here to this moment, to this conversation. And we are grateful for that. And God, when we hit disaster times in the future, can you just help us remember that you are a good planner whose heart toward us is kind? And with your eyes all still closed, if you are here today and you feel like you have not trusted God's plan, and you feel like maybe God has betrayed you and that his plan was disaster, or maybe you trusted your own plans and you have landed yourself in disaster. And if you're here today and you think, God, I've tried doing my own plans, I've tried running my own playbook, and it's not going well, maybe we'll try yours. So in a second, I'm going to say a prayer out loud, and we're all going to say it together so no one can hear you saying these words. But if that's you and you want to try a new plan, you want to try God's plan for you, even when it feels like disaster, there might be a golden July 4th in there. You want to try that. Will you just pray this prayer with us? Jesus, thank you for having a plan for me. And I'm sorry for the ways that I have ignored that plan. And I'm sorry for the ways that I've pushed you away. But God, I don't want to do this without you anymore. So God, today I choose to follow you and trust your good plans. Amen.
Will you guys share your appreciation for Rachel and her story? Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for staying. You segued perfectly into my message next week. You actually stole some lines which is kind of a problem for me now. I'm gonna rehash some of my own version of that story next Sunday as we reflect back on the 5 years. I want you guys all to know that every emotion that Rachel expressed that they felt during that journey, I felt. It was so doggone hard. And today we look around and it's so encouraging because there's like all of you people. There was a week in the summer of 2019, just after some of that we had 23 total people in this building. And gosh, that was hard. But God is faithful. And what's been so cool for me to watch is as I've watched Rachel come back to life and as I've watched Kyle kind of Kyle's like a whole different person now. And as we've shared stories, and as Kyle and I sat here and talked, and we just there is a beauty in what God does when people remain steadfast, knowing what is right, when it's the hardest doggone thing they've ever done. God does things you can't imagine. God brings healing you can't fathom. God brings goodness and mercy in the midst of just junk. And it's powerful. And I just thank you. And thank you, Kyle, Kyle, wherever you are, for staying and for being an amazing example to my kids who didn't know any of that. When Brooklyn, my daughter, gave her life to Jesus a few months back, I said, is there anybody that you want to tell? And the very first person was Miss Marty. That's Kyle's mom. Miss Marty. And then it was Kyle and Rachel. Thank you. All right, here we go. Guys, thank you so much for being here today. Next week, again, I'm going to share kind of my own version of some of that. But every bit of that pain, every bit of that heartache, every bit of that, like, man, is this even, what are we doing? I have my own side of that because I experienced all of it. But God is good and God is faithful. And he has done amazing things here in the last 5 years, but especially in the last year. Many of you are new to City North within the last year, and so it's going to be a fun birthday to celebrate that. One thing that I do want to mention is that next Sunday we're in the process of building this interactive kind of display of the history of City North in like a timeline kind of thing. It's kind of hard to describe. It's going to be really cool. But one of the neat things, the reason I'm mentioning that to you now, is that there's going to be an open panel for year 6. And as a part of that, we're going to have little tags where you can write your dreams, your hopes, your prayers for City North in the upcoming year. And so there's going to kind of be this collaborative effort, because the coolest thing that's happened, I think, among many cool things that's happened, is that God has just assembled this ragtag group of people that make up this incredible church, all with different hopes and different dreams and different backgrounds and different pasts and different church hurt and in different stages of healing. And what's cool is that God has brought all this together in a really unique way. And so you're going to be able to share your hopes and dreams. If you're a part of the City North family, I want you to be praying this week about like what do I hope God does in the next year? And that can be something like, if, I want us to reach 200 people. Cool, but like go deeper than that, because that doesn't really matter in the end. Like some of my prayers are that I hope that there are some families and some relationships that I know need some restoration. And I hope God restores some families and heals some relationships in a supernatural way. So be praying about what that might be for you next week, and we'll get to see those things together. It's going to be really neat. All right, all that said, I need to get you guys out of here. So thank you so much for being here. Before you head out, I have one quick announcement. There is a board kind of out there in the lobby. I don't know, it's about this tall. And on that board, there are some tags that you can take of non-perishable food items. We agreed as a church a couple months ago to take on a couple families for the Bountiful Backpacks program that's through Big Walnut Local School District. And as a part of that, we now as a church family, we feed 10 individuals every weekend for the entire school year. And so we've been purchasing food, like the church has just been purchasing out of your generosity. We've been purchasing food every week. But we wanted to open that up to anybody who would like to be part of helping provide that food. And so here's what I want you to know. If you're not able to do that financially, I don't want you to feel one tiny bit bad about that at all, because the food's going to get taken care of. If no one takes a tag, we're buying the food. It's going to happen. Those families are going to eat. But for those of you who are able and who want to be part of that, there are tags out there. You can take those, and then you can just bring that food back anytime in the next few weeks. There's going to be some bins out there in the lobby that you can drop them off at when you do that. We're probably going to do this a couple times throughout the school year to help provide that. But again, if you're not able to, that's fine. It's 100% fine. The food will get paid for. The food will get bought. Those families will be fed. But we wanted to open that up for you to take advantage of if you would like to be a part of that opportunity. Okay? So, guys, thank you so much for being here today. Again, next Sunday's the birthday. I hope you make plans to join us. It's going to be a really, really fun week. Be blessed. Have a great Sunday. See you back next week.